Good day, everyone. Today, we will talk about the aspects of gene therapy and climate change. But before all of that, let me introduce myself to all of you. I am Werna Joy Cristel Aruy, your teacher for today's discussion, with the aid of my students who are Lyra Joy, Irvin, Judy Ann, Rika Joy, and Mary. Now, let me give you an overview to the points or topics that we will tackle later on. First, we have Lesson 5, the aspects of gene therapy and its subtopics, including the basic process, types of gene therapy, stem cell gene therapy, and the bioethics of gene therapy. After that, we will move on to Lesson 6, which is the climate change, and under it are natural causes, human activities, and effects of climate change onto the society. At this juncture, I would like to ask Mr. Irvin Velarde to take lead of the discussion.
Good day, ma'am. Good day, classmates. The first lesson we will talk about is about the aspects of gene therapy. But before we proceed to the main topic, let me first read the objectives of this lesson. At the end of this lesson, the students should be able to describe gene therapy and its various forms and assess the issue's potential benefit and detriments to global health. So let's proceed. Medical science has detected many human diseases related to defective genes. These types of diseases are not curable by traditional methods like taking readily available medicines. Gene therapy is a potential method to either treat or cure genetic-related human illnesses. In 2015, a team of researchers at the Harvard Medical School and the Boston Children's Hospital stated that they were able to restore basic hearing in genetically deaf mice using gene therapy. The Boston Children's Hospital research team also reported that they have restored a higher level of hearing down to 25 decibels, which is actually equivalent to a whisper. They used an improved gene therapy vector developed at the Massachusetts Eye and Ear that was identified as ANC80, which enables the transfer of genes to the inaccessible outer hair cells, which when introduced into the cochlea. Human gene therapy was actually first realized in 1971 when the first recombinant DNA experiments were planned. It can be simply viewed as insertion foreign DNA into a patient's tissue that hoped to successfully eradicate the targeted disease. It was actually inspired by the success of recombinant DNA technology, which occurred over the last 20 years. Without a doubt, gene therapy is the most promising yet possibly unfavorable medical field being studied. So next is the basic process. There are several approaches to gene therapy. These are the following, according to Fleisler 2017. First is the replacement of mutated gene that causes disease with a healthy copy of the gene. Second, inactivation of a mutated gene that is functionally improperly. And the last, introducing a new gene into the body to help fight a disease. So in general, a gene cannot be directly inserted into a human gene or cell. A gene is inserted into another gene using a carrier or vector. At present, the most common type of vectors are viruses that have been genetically changed to carry normal human DNA. Viruses have evolved a way of encapsulating and transporting their genes to human cells in a pathogenic manner. So these are the two types of gene therapy. The idea of gene therapy is based on correcting a disease at its root. fixing the abnormal genes that appear to lead to certain diseases. There are essentially two forms of gene therapy, one of which is called somatic gene therapy. Somatic gene therapy involves the manipulation of genes in cells that will be helpful to the patients but not inherited to the next generation. It's also the ability to introduce genetic material, RNA, into appropriate cell types of or tissues in the body, thereby altering the gene expression patterns of cells to produce a therapeutic effect. The other form of gene therapy is called germline gene therapy, which involves the gene modification of germ cells or the origin cells that will pass the change onto the next generation. It's also the transfer of DNA into cells in the body that produce germ cells, eggs, or sperm. This type of therapy can correct disease-causing genetic variants that are sure to be passed down from generation to generation.
Thank you, Mr. Velarde. That was very informative and quite impressive. Upon the informations given, may I ask, what are the importance of gene therapy?
Ma'am, may I?
Yes, Ms. Riveros.
So, the importance of gene therapy is it replaces a faulty gene or adds a new gene in an attempt to cure disease or improve your body's ability to fight disease. Gene therapy holds promise for treating a wide range of disease such as cancer, cystic fibrosis, heart disease, diabetes, hemophilia, and AIDS.
Okay, that is right. Thank you, Ms. Riveros, for answering my question. Now, let us move on to the preceding topics, which are the stem cell gene therapy and the bioethics of gene therapy.
Ma'am, may I?
Yes, you may.
Stem cell gene therapy. Stem cells are mother cells that have the potential to become any type of cell in the body. One of the characteristics of a stem cell is their ability to self-renew or multiply while maintaining the potential to develop into other types of cells. Stem cells can become cells of the blood, heart, bones, skin, muscles, brain, among others. There are different sources of stem cells, but all types of stem cell have the same capacity to develop into multiple types of cells. Stem cells are derived from different sources, two of which are embryonic and somatic stem cells. The embryonic stem cells are derived from a 4 or 5-day-old human embryo that is in the blastocyst phase of development. The embryos are usually extras that have been created in IVF or in vitro fertilization. Clinics where several eggs are fertilized in a test tube then implanted into a woman. The somatic stem cells are cells that exist throughout the body after embryonic development are found inside of different types of tissue. These stem cells have been found in tissues such as the brain, bone, marrow, blood vessels, skeletal muscles, skin, and the liver. They remain in undividing state for years until activated by disease or tissue injury. These stem cells can divide or self-renew indefinitely, enabling them to generate the entire original organ. It is generally thought that the adult or somatic stem cells are limited in their ability to differentiate based on their tissue or origin, but there is some evidence to suggest that they can be differentiated to become other cell types. The biotics of gene therapy. There are ethical issues involved in the gene therapy. Some of the inquiries cited are: 1. How can good and bad uses of gene therapy distinguish? Who decides which traits are normal and which constitute a disability or disorder? Will the high cost of gene therapy make it available only in the wealthy? Could the widespread use of gene therapy make society less accepting of people who are different? Should people be allowed to use gene therapy to enhance basic human traits such as height, intelligence, or aesthetic ability? Another controversy involves the germline therapy. Germline therapy is genetic modification of germ cells that will pass the change on next generation. There are a lot of questions on the effects of the gene alteration to the unborn child in the next generation. Since the alteration can be passed on, in the United States, the government does not fund researches on human germline gene therapy. Summary. Gene therapy is a method that may treat or cure genetic-related human illnesses. There are forms of gene therapy. One is somatic gene therapy, which involves the manipulation of genes in cells that will be helpful to the patient but not inherited to the next generation. The other is germline gene therapy, which involves the genetic modification of germ cells or the origin cells that will pass the change to the next generation. There are many ethical issues on the gene therapy. Some of these issues are about questions on whose authority or power to decide which human traits should be altered. Other concerns are on the discriminatory effects of those who may not or treat a gene therapy.
So, what exactly is gene therapy? First, let's start with the basics. This is a gene. Genes are made up of DNA, which are the blueprints to build the enzymes or proteins that do the work for your body. As far as we know, humans have between 20,000 and 25,000 genes, and most people have 2 copies of each gene inherited from each of our parents. They are the building blocks of our physical makeup, from the color of our hair, to our athletic abilities, to our immune system. But sometimes genes aren't built correctly, and a small adjustment to the DNA within our genes can change how our proteins work, which can affect how we breathe, walk, or digest food properly. To better understand how genes change, here's Dr. Michelle Kalos.
So our genes are mutating all the time as a result of chemical processes in the cell, as well as external influences like ultraviolet light. We can also inherit mutations from our parents. Now, when we wind up with these mutations, they can sometimes cause disease, and that's really where gene therapy comes in.
If genes are like the blueprint to our body, gene therapy can fill in some missing drawings. Gene therapy is the introduction, removal, or change in genetic material, specifically DNA or its molecule cousin, RNA, into the cells of a patient to repair or change a gene to treat a specific disease. The transferred genetic material then changes how a protein, or group of proteins, is produced by the cell. It can reduce levels of certain disease-causing proteins, increase production of disease-fighting proteins, or even produce new or modified proteins within the cell. You may be curious how a gene and the genetic material it holds is transferred to the cell during gene therapy. Well, a gene cannot be directly inserted into a cell. Instead, a carrier, also known as a vector, helps deliver the gene. Typically, viruses are used as vectors because they've evolved to be very good at sneaking into and infecting cells. But in this case, their motive is to insert the gene or genes into the cell. The infectious part of a virus is removed, allowing it to still enter the cell's nucleus without making the patient sick. It's worth noting there are 2 kinds of gene therapy. in vivo and ex vivo.
In vivo gene therapy, the genes are introduced directly into the patient's cells while the cells are still in the patient's body. In ex vivo gene therapy, cells are removed from the patient's body, then the genes are added to those cells in the lab, and the cells are then returned to the patient. The right approach depends on the disease that the patient has and the tissue that's affected, and that would tell us which is the best way to approach this.
Advances in gene therapy research allow us to treat and hopefully someday avoid rare and debilitating diseases.
This is the world. That's you and that's me. The world has the perfect temperature to keep all living things alive and happy. This temperature depends on a balance. The sun's heat goes to Earth to make it warm. The sun's heat bounces back to space to make the Earth cool. When this balance is lost, the climate changes. The Earth's climate has changed many times before. This is called natural climate change. It's caused by volcanic eruptions, changes in the sun's energy, and changes in the Earth's orbit. Greenhouse gases also make the Earth warmer. They trap heat from the sun. Greenhouse gases are like a blanket covering the Earth. It started in the 1700s. Humans started to build more things. We burned coal to make electricity. We burn oil to make our cars and planes move. We use chemicals to make things. We cut down lots of trees. We burn gas to cook food. We dump lots of trash on landfills. We plant a lot more rice. All these things release greenhouse gases. Remember the blanket over the Earth? Because of humans, it got much, much thicker. When I get hot, I sweat. I even get dizzy. Imagine the Earth. Because it's hotter, glaciers and ice sheets are melting. Seas are rising, storms are getting stronger, some places are getting dry, even the sea is getting warmer. All living things are in big trouble. So what should we do? We need to change the way we live so we can stop releasing so much greenhouse gases. That way, the Earth's blanket will go back to normal. We also need to be ready for what climate change will bring. In December, there will be a big meeting of nations. They'll meet in Paris to decide how each country can help. Their decision will decide the future of Earth, our home.
We have gone throughout the whole lesson 5. This time, let me give you a short introduction about our lesson 6, the climate change. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, a United Nations body that evaluates climate change science, released its report on global climate change. The report's important conclusions were the following. Earth's climate has changed significantly over the past century. The significant change has human influence using climate models, and if the trend continues, the global mean surface temperature will increase between 1 Celsius and 3.5 Celsius by 21,000. Why should a few degrees of warming be a cause for concern? According to experts, global climate change could have a greater potential to change life in our planet than anything else except a nuclear war. But first, what is climate change? Climate change refers to the statistically significant changes in climate for continuous period of time. Factors that contribute to climate change can be natural internal process, external forces, and persistent anthropogenic changes in the composition of the atmosphere or in land use. It can also be due to natural occurrences or contributed by acts of human beings. This lesson will present the causes of climate change and its effects onto the society. Causes of climate change. The causes of climate change could be natural or by human activities. One example of its natural causes is the volcanic eruptions. Volcanic eruptions are one of the natural causes of climate change. When volcanoes erupt, it emits different natural aerosols like carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxides, salt crystals, volcanic ashes or dust, and even microorganisms like bacteria and viruses. The volcanic eruption can cause a cooling effect to the lithosphere because its emitted aerosol can block a certain percentage of solar radiation. This cooling effect can last for 1 to 2 years. What happens in violent volcanic eruptions is the release of ash particles in the stratosphere. The volcanic ashes, which have sulfur dioxide and water vapor, forms two sulfuric acid and sulfurous aerosols. The sulfurous aerosols then are transported by easterly or westerly winds. Moreover, volcanoes located near the equator are more likely to cause global cooling because of the wind pattern. On the other hand, volcanoes located near to north or south poles are less likely to cause cooling because of cool wind pattern. The sulfurous aerosols are confined in cool areas. There are several recorded major volcanic eruptions that cause climate change. Mount Tambora of Indonesia erupted in 1816, which was considered as the largest known eruption in human history. The eruption caused snowfall in the northeastern United States and Canada. It affected their agricultural lands, losing crops that caused food shortage and increased human mortality. The eruptions of Mount Kataratu of Indonesia in 1883 and Mount Pinatubo of the Philippines in 1991 has contributed to the cold years of planet Earth.
Orbital changes. Earth's orbit can also cause climate change. This was proposed by the Milankovitch theory. The Milankovitch theory states that as the Earth travels through space around the Sun, cyclical variations in three elements of Earth's sun geometry combine to produce variations in the amount of solar energy that reaches Earth. The three elements that have cyclic variations are eccentricity, obliquity, and precession. Eccentricity is a term used to describe the shape of Earth's orbit around the Sun. The impact of the variation is a change in the amount of solar energy from perihelion around January 3 to aphelion around July 4. The time frame for the cycle is approximately 98,000 years. Currently, Earth's eccentricity is 0.016 and there is about 6.4% increase in insolation from July to January. Academic Emporia 2017 states, the eccentricity influences seasonal differences. When Earth is closest to the Sun, it gets more solar radiation. If the perihelion occurs during the winter is less severe. If a hemisphere has its summer while closest to the Sun, summers are relatively warm. Obliquity is the variation of the tilt of Earth's axis away from the orbital plane. As this tilt changes, the seasons become more exaggerated. The obliquity changes on a cycle taking approximately 40,000 years. Academic Emporia states the more tilt means more severe seasons, warmer summers and colder winters. Less tilt means less severe seasons, cooler summers, and milder winters. Precession is the change in orientation of Earth's rotational axis. The precession cycle takes about 19,000 to 23,000 years. Precession is caused by two factors, a wobble of Earth's axis and a turning around of the elliptical orbit of the Earth itself. Obliquity affected the tilt of Earth's axis. Precession affects the direction of Earth's axis. The change in the axis location changes the dates of perihelion, closest distance from Sun, and aphelion, farthest distance from Sun, and this increases the seasonal contrast in the one hemisphere while decreasing it in other hemisphere. Currently, Earth is closest to the Sun in the northern hemisphere winter, which makes the winters there less severe. Another consequence of precession is a shift in the celestial poles. 5,000 years ago, the North Star was to ban in the constellation Draco. Currently, the North Star is Polaris in the constellation Ursa Minor. During the 1940s and 1950s, the theory fell in disrepute due to radiocarbon dating, indicating a lag in cooling versus insulation and to scale problem with high-frequency glacial advances. The theory was revived several times throughout the late 1960s to the present. The carbon dioxide theory. Carbon dioxide is added when power and heat are produced by burning coal, oil, and other fossil fuels. Carbon dioxide is transparent to sunshine but not invisible to infrared or heat radiation leaving the ground. Carbon dioxide absorbs part of the infrared radiation in the air and returns it to the ground, keeping the air near the surface warmer than it would be if the carbon dioxide did not act like a blanket. Doubling the carbon dioxide raises the temperature to 2 degrees Celsius to 3 degrees Celsius. Human activities. Human activities contribute to climate change. The largest known to contribution comes from the burning of fossil fuels, which releases carbon dioxide gas to the atmosphere. Greenhouse gases and aerosols affect climate by altering incoming solar radiation and outgoing infrared or thermal radiation that are part of Earth's energy balance. Changing the atmospheric abundance or properties of these gases and particles can lead to a warming or cooling of the climate change or climate system. Since the start of the industrial era, about 1750, the overall effect of human activities on climate has been a warming influence. The human impact on climate during this era greatly exceeds that due to known changes in natural processes such as solar changes and volcanic eruptions. Human activities result in emissions of 4 principal greenhouse gases: carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and the halocarbons, a group of gases containing fluorine, chlorine, and bromine. These gases accumulate in the atmosphere, causing concentrations to increase with time.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rodelas. You have mentioned earlier the greenhouse gases. What is greenhouse gases? And what are the effects of climate change to society?
Greenhouse gases are natural gases. High level of these gases in the atmosphere contributes to the greenhouse effect. The increasing amount of these gases is due to human activities. High level of carbon dioxide comes from fossil fuel used in transportation and the building, heating, cooling, and manufacture of cement and other goods. Deforestation releases carbon dioxide and reduces its uptake by plants. High methane emission is related to agriculture, natural gas distribution, and landfills. High nitrous oxide is also emitted by human activities. Principal halocarbons include the chlorofluorocarbons, which were used extensively as refrigeration agents and in other industrial processes before their presence in the atmosphere was found to cause stratospheric ozone depletion. The abundance of chlorofluorocarbon gases is decreasing as a result of international regulations designed to protect the ozone layer. Ozone is another greenhouse gas that is continually produced and destroyed in the atmosphere by chemical reasons. In the troposphere, human activities have increased ozone through the release of gases such as carbon monoxide, hydrocarbons, and nitrogen oxide, which chemically react to produce ozone. Halocarbons released by human activities destroy ozone in the stratosphere and have caused the ozone hole over Antarctica. While water vapor is the most abundant and important greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, human activities have only small direct influence on the amount of atmospheric water vapor. Indirectly, humans have the potential to affect water vapor substantially by changing climate. For example, a warmer atmosphere contains more water vapor. Humans' activities also influence water vapor through methane emissions because methane undergoes chemical destruction in the stratosphere, producing a small amount of water vapor and aerosols, the small particles present in the atmosphere with widely varying size, concentration, and chemical composition. Some aerosols are emitted directly into the atmosphere while others are formed from emitted compounds. Aerosols contain both naturally occurring compounds and those emitted as a result of human activities. Fossil fuel and biomass burning have increased aerosols containing sulfur compounds, organic compounds, and black carbon. Human activities such as surface mining and industrial processes have increased dust in the atmosphere. On September 16, 1986, an international treaty was adopted. It is called the Montreal Protocol. The treaty aimed to regulate the production and use of chemicals that contribute to ozone layer depletion. While the effects of climate change on society as climate change could cause severe effects to all life forms around our planet. It directly affects the basic elements of people's lives like water, food, health, use of land, and the environment. With the average global temperature which is predicted to rise by 2 to 3 degrees Celsius within the next 50 years, glaciers will continue to melt faster. Melting glaciers will increase flood risk during the wet season and strongly reduce dry season water supplies to 1/6 of the world's population, predominantly in the Indian subcontinent, parts of China, and the Andes in South America. Declining crop yields due to drought, especially in Africa, are likely to leave hundreds of millions without the ability to produce or purchase sufficient food. At mid to high latitudes, crop yields may increase for moderate temperature rises 2 to 3 degrees Celsius, but then decline with greater amounts of warming. Ocean acidification, a direct result of rising carbon dioxide levels, will have major effects on marine ecosystem, with possible adverse consequences on fish stocks. Climate change will increase also the worldwide deaths from heat stress. Vector-borne diseases such as malaria and dengue fever could become more widespread if effective control measures are not in place. Rising sea levels may result in more flooded areas each year, with a warming of 3 or 4 degrees Celsius. There will be serious risk and increasing pressure for coastal protection. Ecosystems will be particularly vulnerable to climate change, with one study estimating that around 15 to 40% of species face extinction with 2 degrees Celsius of warming. The consequences of climate change will become disproportionately more damaging with increased warming. Higher temperatures will increase the chance of triggering abrupt and large-scale changes that lead to regional disruption, migration, and conflict. Warming may induce sudden shifts in regional weather patterns like the monsoons or the El Niño. Such changes would have severe consequences for water availability and flooding in tropical regions and threaten the livelihood of billions. Melting or collapse of ice sheets would rise sea levels and eventually threaten at least 4 million kilometers of land, which today is home to 5% of the world's population.
To summarize Lesson 6, climate change is a worldwide issue that we have to face. Climate change is referred as statistically significant climate variation persisting for an extended period of time. The continuous climate change could bring drastic effects to living and non-living forms on Earth. Climate change is brought by several factors like natural processes and persistent human activity. Global warming is one of the major effects of climate change. Global warming threatens all life forms on Earth. It has drastic effects on water availability, food source, health issues, land use, and ecosystem.